My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and in this video I'm continuing my Silmarillion Synopsis series with Quinta Chapter 12 of Men. Basically, this is our introduction to men coming into Middle-earth, but they won't really enter the story so much until a couple of chapters later. So this is really just some basic background, and it's a pretty short chapter, so this will be pretty quick. So let's get started. After the Valar made the sun and moon, they basically left Middle-earth alone. They didn't completely forget about it, although most of them seem to have paid very little attention to it, and it tells us that Ulmo is really the main person who keeps Middle-earth and the Noldor in his thought, with Manwë also having some thought for the exiles. But by and large, they kind of just leave it alone. With the sun coming into existence, it tells us that just the air of Middle-earth becomes very heavy with mortality and growth and things like that. Things begin to age faster. Of course, the sleep of Yavanna ends. Things that had been basically dormant, like trees and other living things, now really come to life and begin to grow and age. And so it kind of makes sense that with the first coming of the sun, we get the arrival of men far into the east of Middle-earth in a land called Hildorian. Now, we don't meet them for a long time, as I mentioned earlier, but they first arise here, and of course, being mortal, it kind of makes sense that they come about when the thing that seems to bring a lot of mortality and hastening of aging and such first comes about. So that timing seems rather interesting. Now, you have to remember the Silmarillion is basically an Elvish-perspective work, and so the elves have a lot of different names for men, which I want to kind of go through just to give you an idea of how they look at this mortal race. So elves call them the second people, or the Atani, and incidentally, etymologically, the Atani is where we get the Edain part of Dunedain derivatively, if I remember correctly. They call them Hildor, which means the followers, Apanonar, the afterborn, Engwar, the sickly, because elves don't really get sick, unlike humans. The Firimar, or mortals, they also name them the usurpers, the strangers, the inscrutable, the self-cursed, the heavy-handed, the night-fearers, and the children of the sun. So I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail about all of those things, but it gives you some idea of the elvish perspective on men. And some of those names won't really make sense until much later on in the history of Middle-earth, but that at least is an interesting introduction in and of itself. Now, you may remember from our chapter on the sun and the moon that the sun and moon both actually rose in the west initially because they were made in Valinor, and originally they just kind of went back and forth in the sky without going all the way around. So because they arose in the west and the men awoke with the sun, they saw the sun coming in the west and they really wanted to see what was in the west, so they began moving in that direction. However, unlike the elves, they never come into direct contact with the Valar because the Valar don't go and, directly try to interfere in their history or, bring them to Valinor or anything like that. So even though they're moving towards the Valar in Valinor, they don't really know why, other than they're just trying to go to where the light is. And the Valar don't really interfere, but it does tell us that Ulmo tries to send messages through the waters of Middle-earth, but it tells us that the men don't really have the skill to understand them, and that because of the messages, they love water, but they don't understand what's being told to them. And because they never come into direct contact with the Valar, they really just have always had a standoffish kind of relationship with them and even fear the Valar. That, of course, will change to some extent for some men later on, but we'll see that as we move along. So, along with this western movement, they've also, they start to branch out, and they eventually meet some of the elves who never set out on the journey to Valinor, and they kind of learn some things from them, which, of course, the Avari, the elves that never set out, they don't know all that much. They just know that the Valar came, offered to take them to Valinor, and they didn't go. So, I mean, they know something about the West from them as well. And basically, at the beginning, because Morgoth was kind of just checked by the first rising of the sun, and most of the evil things hid out for a while, men in the very early stages apparently had a fairly nice time of it. They wandered the earth in just kind of the joy of, new life, not really having a whole lot of cares, but that changes pretty quickly. The last part of this overview of, men as opposed to elves tells us that while elves and men originally had the same stature and strength, elves had greater wisdom, beauty, and skill, and the elves who had gone to Valinor as much surpassed the elves who had not as the elves who had not surpassed the men. So this gives us some idea of the nature of kind of the power level of men versus elves who went to Valinor. I mean, that tells us something about the elves that went to Valinor. They're extremely powerful, and we'll see that in the next chapter when we get to some of the major battles in Beleriand. But another thing it tells us here is that the men at this time were, when they finally come into contact with elves, especially in the West, they do become allies in the wars against Morgoth, but they will later become estranged from them, mainly because of Morgoth's triumphs in the wars in Beleriand and the seeds that he sows in lies and things of that nature, and drives the men and elves apart. And so we've already got a premonition here of things aren't going to go well. The other thing that it tells us, of course, is kind of what we already knew, which is men, unlike elves, die. They can die of old age. They can become sick and die, unlike elves. So, I mean, it's just kind of giving us some of the major contrasts of the two different races. And it just kind of gives us really just basic information in this chapter. Like I said, it was pretty short, and that's pretty much it. The only other thing that it does mention is that where the men go after they die, elves don't have a clue. The only intimation that anybody does know is that Manwë and Mondos are probably the only two of the Valar even who know where men go. So you have to remember, again, this is an Elvish perspective. They don't know everything, and they certainly don't know that much about men, which is probably one of their names for the men is the Inscrutable. So that's our introduction to the race of men in Middle-earth from the Elvish point of view. Of course, men would probably say a few different things about themselves if they had the opportunity, but we're not really going to see much of that. So, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope this helped you out in your reading of the Silmarillion. I know some people have commented and said things of that nature that this series is helping them, which is my goal, so I'm glad to hear that. If you want to check out more, you want to follow me on Twitter. I occasionally post some interesting Tolkien trivia there. You can follow me at JRRTLore. And of course, if you want to subscribe, you can click this button. You can support me over at Patreon, and you can find a couple of my previous videos here. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste.